Welcome, dear traveler, to Medieval Sleep Tales, where we step away from the noise of our modern world and into the gentle embrace of centuries past. Tonight, we invite you to settle into a place of warmth and wonder, where the medieval world reveals itself, not through grand chronicles of kings and conquest, but through the quiet dignity of ordinary hands performing extraordinary work. Let yourself sink deeper into comfort as we journey together to a village carpenter's workshop, where the air is thick with the honest perfume of fresh-cut wood and linseed oil, where golden light filters through small windows to dance across grain and sawdust, where every tool hanging on the wall tells a story of patience and skill passed down through generations. This is the village carpenter, building medieval life. 3 hours of peaceful immersion into a world where creation is meditation, where wood and maker speak in whispers of chisel and plane. Perhaps you're seeking the deep rest that only comes when the mind can truly let go. Or maybe you're on a long journey through the night and need a companion for the road. Whatever brings you here, know that you are welcome. Let the tensions of your day fall away like wood shavings to the workshop floor. Close your eyes if sleep is calling, or let your gaze soften as you drive or work, and allow this story to wrap around you like a woolen cloak warmed by a hearth fire. There is no urgency here, no demands, only the slow, sure rhythm of saw through timber, the whisper of plane across oak, and the timeless piece of work done with love and care. So breathe deeply, settle in, and let us begin. Part 1. The workshop awakens. The village still sleeps when Thomas the carpenter stirs in the darkness before dawn, though darkness is perhaps too strong a word for this soft summer night that never quite surrendered to black. Through the small window above his bed, he can see the sky transitioning from deepest blue to something gentler, something that speaks of morning gathering itself beyond the eastern hills. The thatched roof above him holds the lingering cool of night, and for a moment he simply lies there, listening to the breathing of his wife beside him, the gentle sighs of his 2 children in the loft above, the profound quiet of a world not yet awakened to its labors. Thomas rises without urgency, moving with the practiced silence of one who has performed this ritual for decades. His feet find the smooth, packed earth floor, cool and firm, and he reaches for the clothes he laid out the evening before, the same rough wool tunic he wears every day, patched at the elbows by his wife's careful hands, comfortable as an old friend. The leather apron hangs by the door, stiff with age and use, marked with the history of 1,000 projects. Oak stains here, chisel nicks there, the subtle geography of a working life. He steps out into the village lane, and the world greets him with the perfume of early summer. Dew lies heavy on every surface, transforming simple things into jeweled wonders. Spiderwebs, strung between fence posts, become delicate lace. Herb gardens glisten, as though blessed by careful hands. The air itself tastes fresh, carrying scents of wild roses from the hedgerows, of fresh-turned earth from yesterday's fieldwork, of the river that runs just beyond the village mill. A blackbird begins its morning song from the top of the ash tree that shades the village well, and Thomas pauses to listen, allowing himself this moment of pure presence before the day's work begins. His workshop stands 20 paces from his cottage, a structure he built himself 15 years ago when he became master of his craft and could afford to establish his own place rather than working in another man's shop. The building is modest but sound, with oak posts sunk deep into the earth, walls of wattle and daub kept smooth and pale with regular coats of lime wash, and a good thatched roof that sheds rain like water from a duck's back. The double doors that face the lane can be thrown wide open in good weather, allowing him to work almost outdoors while still having shelter overhead. Thomas lifts the wooden latch and pushes open the right-hand door, and immediately the smell embraces him, that incomparable fragrance that is as much home to him as his own hearth. It is the scent of wood in all its varieties, the sweet vanilla warmth of fresh oak, the spicy edge of walnut, the clean brightness of ash, the mellow depth of aged elm. Beneath these are other notes, linseed oil and beeswax, the metallic tang of iron tools, old sawdust compressed into corners, the faint smokiness that clings to everything in a world lit by fire. He moves through the familiar space with the certainty of one who could find any tool in complete darkness. The workshop is organized with a precision born of necessity and maintained by habit. Along the left wall runs his main workbench, a massive affair of oak planks worn smooth and slightly concave in the center, where 3 generations of carpenters have stood. His tools hang above it on a board, he himself carved and fitted with careful pegs. Saws of varying sizes, their teeth sharp and true. Planes from the massive jack plane down to delicate smoothing planes no bigger than his palm. Chisels and gradations from broad as his thumb to fine as a quill. Mallets of different weights and purposes. Marking gauges, squares, bevels, all the instruments by which wood is measured and transformed. The right side of the workshop houses his timber store, great beams and boards stacked according to type and age. Oak dominates, as it must in a world built primarily from this king of trees. But there are treasures here too, planks of walnut saved for special commissions, ash for tool handles and anything requiring flexibility and strength, elm for seats and tabletops, yew for the occasional bow. Some of these boards have been drawing for years, waiting for their moment, their purpose. Thomas knows each piece intimately, knows which oak came from the great tree that fell in the storm of 1398, which ash was cut from the copse near the manor house, which elm was traded from a carpenter 2 villages over. He begins, as he always begins, with the ritual of sharpening. A carpenter's tools are his livelihood, his reputation, his connection to the craft itself. Dull tools do not simply work poorly, they disrespect the wood, they endanger the craftsman, they betray the entire enterprise. So before any work can commence, before the day's projects can be considered, Thomas must ensure that every edge is keen. He takes his largest plane from its place on the wall and settles onto the low bench by the window where the growing light is strongest. The sharpening stone rests in its wooden box, a rectangle of gray stone worn concave by decades of use, its surface still damp from where he wet it last evening. He adds a few drops of water, feeling the stone's slight roughness under his fingers, then positions the plane's blade at precisely the angle long since committed to muscle memory. The motion that follows is meditation made physical, a rhythmic, steady stroking of metal against stone, forward and back, maintaining perfect consistency of angle and pressure. The sound is gentle, a whisper of steel on stone, a soft shushing that speaks of patience and attention. Thomas's mind empties of thought and fills instead with sensation. The resistance of stone against blade, the slight warmth building in his fingers from repeated motion, the way the steel begins to sing a slightly different note as the edge grows keener. He pauses periodically to test the blade against his thumbnail, feeling for that telltale sharpness, that ability to catch and grip rather than slide. When it is right, and he knows the moment with a certainty that comes from 10,000 repetitions, he wipes the blade clean and moves to the next tool. Chisel after chisel receives his attention, each one brought to the same exquisite sharpness, each one restored to its proper purpose. The work is unhurried, almost ceremonial. In a world without clocks beyond the sun's passage and the church bells marking the hours of prayer, there is no sense of time being wasted. This is not preparation for work. This is work itself, the foundation upon which all else will rest. A carpenter who rushes his sharpening will pay for it all day long in tools that bind and tear rather than cut cleanly, in muscle strain from fighting dull edges, in work that falls short of what it could be. By the time he finishes, the sun has cleared the eastern hills and golden light is pouring through the workshop's open door, painting the sawdust on the floor into constellations of amber. The village is stirring now. He can hear the lowing of cattle being led into the common pasture, the voices of women at the well drawing water for the day, a distant clang of hammer on anvil from the smith's forge. But Thomas remains in his workshop, in his own world, ready now to begin. Today's task is one he's been anticipating for weeks: the construction of a chest for the wool merchant whose house stands on the village's east side. It will be a piece substantial enough to hold the merchant's business records and precious contracts, strong enough to resist both casual theft and the ravages of time, but beautiful too, worthy of the prosperity it represents. Thomas has spent evenings sketching designs by candlelight, considering proportions, imagining how the grain of different boards might work together to create visual poetry. He moves to his timber stack and selects the oak he set aside for this project months ago, boards from a tree that stood for perhaps 200 years in the Lord's forest before being felled and quartered. The wood has dried slowly in his shop, protected from sun and rain, gradually releasing its moisture until it reached that perfect equilibrium with the air around it. Thomas runs his hand over the surface of the topmost board, feeling the grain beneath his palm, reading the wood's story in its patterns. The wider spaces between growth rings from good years of ample rain, the tighter rings from years of drought, the swirls where a branch once grew. Every board is unique, a fingerprint of the tree's life, and a good carpenter learns to read these patterns, to work with them rather than against them. He carries 4 boards to the workbench, leaning them against the wall where he can see them all together. This part of the work requires vision more than action. He must see the chest before it exists, must imagine how these flat boards will transform into a 3-dimensional object, must select which piece will form which part based on grain, figure, and character. The front panels should be the most visually interesting, perhaps that board with the subtle ray fleck that catches light like watered silk. The sides can be straighter grained, valued for strength and stability. The bottom needs boards that are absolutely true, that will not warp or twist even when bearing considerable weight. The first actual cut of the day is always a moment of commitment. Once the saw begins its work, there is no going back, no undoing. But Thomas has made his decisions, and his hand is steady as he positions the first board across 2 sawhorses and reaches for his largest crosscut saw. The blade is perhaps 3 feet long, with teeth designed to slice through wood perpendicular to the grain, and it hangs from the tool wall like a ceremonial sword. He marks his cut line with a marking knife, not a pencil. The knife incisors a tiny valley in the wood surface that will guide his saw more surely than any drawn line. Then he positions the saw, feeling the teeth bite into the oak just so, and begins the pull stroke that starts the kerf. There is a particular music to sawing, a rhythm that good craftsmen fall into as naturally as breathing. Pull down and back, the teeth cut only on the pull stroke in these English saws, unlike the push-cutting saws of other lands. Return forward with barely any pressure, just enough to keep the blade tracking true. Pull again, return, pull, return. The saw whispers through oak with a sound like wind through winter grass, a gentle shushing punctuated by the occasional louder note when it encounters a denser section of grain. Sawdust begins to accumulate beneath the cut, each grain a tiny fragment of the tree that was, falling away to reveal the shapes that will be. Thomas's breathing synchronizes with the saw's rhythm, his entire body engaged in the motion, not just his arms, but his back, his legs, his core, all working together to maintain the straight line he envisions. The cut completes, and the board falls away clean. Thomas examines the cut surface, running his finger along it to feel for roughness or deviation. The cut is true, straight and square, exactly where he intended it. This is the satisfaction of sharp tools and careful attention work that meets the standard of perfection he holds in his mind. He continues through the morning, cutting each piece to its intended dimension, always measuring twice, always marking carefully, always sawing with that same meditative rhythm. The pile of cut pieces grows on one end of the workbench, while the sawdust deepens on the floor. Periodically, he pauses to wipe his brow. Even the morning is warming now, and physical labor generates its own heat, or to take a drink from the clay jug of small beer that sits in the workshop's coolest corner. When the church bell rings for terce, marking the 3rd hour after sunrise, Thomas's wife Margaret appears at the workshop door with bread and cheese wrapped in cloth and a handful of early strawberries gleaming red in her palm. They sit together on the bench outside the workshop door in the shade of the eaves, eating in comfortable silence. The bread is from her own baking, 3 days old now and beginning to firm up, but still good, with a hearty wheaten taste that speaks of honest flour. The cheese is sharp and crumbly, made from their neighbor's cow's milk, aged just enough to have real character. The strawberries are sweet explosions of summer, tiny and intense, nothing like the watery giants that will come later in the season. "The chest is begun?" Margaret asks, and Thomas nods, his mouth full of bread. She has been married to a carpenter for 20 years and knows the rhythms of his work as well as she knows the rhythms of her own. The kneading of bread dough, the spinning of wool, the endless cycle of cooking and cleaning and mending that keeps a household running. She knows when he is pleased with how a project is progressing by the set of his shoulders, the ease in his movements. She knows when he is troubled by some problem of joint or proportion by the way his brow furrows, even at the supper table. "It will be a good piece," Thomas says when he has swallowed. "The oak is fine. Straight grain, no hidden shakes or checks. It will work well." Margaret smiles. She has heard this before, this quiet confidence in materials and craft. It is one of the things she loves about her husband, his respect for wood, his refusal to blame his materials when something goes wrong, his belief that with sufficient skill and care, every piece of timber can become something beautiful and useful. After their brief meal, Margaret returns to the cottage and her own work, and Thomas re-enters the workshop. Now comes the more exacting labor, the joinery that will hold the chest together. In a world without screws, without sophisticated metal fasteners beyond simple nails and hinges, the strength of any wooden object comes from the ingenuity of its joints, the way one piece of wood interlocks with another to create a whole stronger than its parts. Thomas has decided on mortise and tenon joints for the corners of the chest, a classic choice, proven over centuries to be both strong and durable. The tenon will be cut into the end of each front and back board, a rectangular tongue that will fit into a corresponding rectangular hole, the mortise, cut into the sideboards. When properly made, when the fit is neither too tight nor too loose, these joints will hold for generations, the wood actually growing stronger as it ages and settles into its joint configuration. He begins with marking out the mortises, using his marking gauge to scribe lines parallel to the edge of the sideboard. The gauge is a simple tool, a wooden beam with an adjustable fence and a sharp pin that scratches the wood, but in skilled hands, it becomes an instrument of precision. Thomas sets the fence to the exact distance he wants, locks it in place with a wooden wedge, and then runs the gauge along the edge of the board, the pin scoring a fine line in the oak surface. He repeats this on both edges, creating the boundaries of his mortise. The actual cutting of the mortise is done with chisel and mallet, a process that requires both force and delicacy. Thomas selects a chisel slightly narrower than the width of the mortise he intends to cut. He positions it between his scribed lines, perfectly vertical, and taps the mallet sharply. The chisel sinks into the oak, biting out a small chip. He repositions it slightly deeper into the board and taps again. Chip by chip, layer by layer, the mortise deepens. This is work that cannot be rushed, work that demands complete attention. A mortise cut at the wrong angle will weaken the joint. A mortise cut too deep will emerge from the other side of the board, ruining the piece. A mortise with ragged edges will never hold its tenon securely. So Thomas works with perfect focus, the workshop filled with the rhythmic tap-tap of mallet on chisel, the small thud of wood chips falling away, the occasional pause as he checks his progress, blowing away the chips to see clearly into the deepening hole. When the first mortise is complete, he tests it with his finger, feeling the smooth vertical walls, the flat bottom, the square corners. It is exactly as he intended it. He moves on to the next, and the next, each one receiving the same meticulous attention. By the time he has cut all the mortises needed, the sun is high overhead, and sweat dampens his tunic despite the relative coolness of the workshop's shade. Now for the tenons, which must be cut to match their mortises perfectly. This work is done with a saw, his tenon saw, smaller than the crosscut saw he used earlier, with finer teeth designed for precision work. Thomas marks the shoulders of the tenon, the points where the board's thickness will be reduced to create the protruding tongue. Then he positions his saw at the waist side of the line and begins to cut, careful to stay outside his marked line so he can pare down to exact dimensions later if needed. The saw whispers through the cut, vertical strokes that require Thomas to maintain perfect angle and pressure. Any deviation will result in a tenon that is not square, that will not fit its mortise properly. He works his way around all four sides of the tenon, creating the shoulders, then positions the board upright in his bench vise and saws down to create the cheeks, the sides of the tenon itself. When the tenon is cut, he tests it against its intended mortise. Too tight, as he expected, as he intended. Better to cut slightly oversize and pare down than to cut too small and have a loose joint. He takes a paring chisel, one of his smallest and sharpest, and begins to shave whisper-thin layers from the tenon's cheeks. A test fit. Still too tight. More shaving. Test again. Better, but not quite there. The process requires patience and a willingness to work in the tiniest increments. But eventually, he feels that magical moment when the tenon slides into its mortise with firm but smooth resistance. Not loose enough to rattle, not tight enough to require hammering, but perfectly snug, ready to be glued and pegged and to hold for 100 years. The afternoon passes in this careful dance of measurement and cutting, testing and adjusting. Each joint is a small victory, each perfect fit a confirmation of skills honed over decades. The workshop grows warmer as the day ages, and Thomas pauses occasionally to drink from his beer jug or to step outside and stretch his back, looking up at the sky where swallows wheel and dive, chasing summer insects. The village around him is alive with activity, children playing in the lane, women hanging laundry to dry in the sun, a cart rumbling past on its way to the mill. But his focus remains on the work before him, the transformation of rough boards into something purposeful and fine. By the time the bells ring for vespers, marking the evening's approach, Thomas has completed the joinery for the chest's main structure. The pieces lie on his workbench, still separate, but ready to be assembled. Tomorrow he will glue and peg the joints, will add the bottom boards, will begin work on the lid with its internal till for storing smaller items. But for now, it is enough to have made this progress, to have spent a day in the work he loves, surrounded by the tools and materials that make sense to him in a way that little else in life does. He tidies the workshop as the light begins to fade, sweeping the sawdust into a pile. It will go to his wife for the floor of the cottage, where fresh sawdust scattered each week keeps the packed earth clean and sweet-smelling. He wipes down his tools and returns them to their places on the wall. He covers his work in progress with a cloth to protect it from overnight dust. These small rituals of closure are as important as the rituals of beginning, the way he honors both the work and the tools that make it possible. When he steps out into the evening, the sky is painted in shades of amber and rose, and the air has cooled enough that walking home is a pleasure rather than a trial. Smoke rises from cottage chimneys as families prepare evening meals, and the smell of cooking fires mingles with the green scent of grass and the sweet perfume of honeysuckle blooming in hedgerows. Margaret has supper waiting, a pottage thick with beans and root vegetables, dark bread still warm enough that the butter melts when spread, and a cup of ale that tastes like liquid rest. His children, young Thomas and Anne, tell him about their day. The younger Thomas has been helping the thatcher repair a section of barn roof, learning a trade adjacent to his father's, while Anne has been in the manor house, learning embroidery from the lady's waiting woman. They are good children, growing strong and capable, and Thomas feels the deep contentment of a man whose life, while not easy, has meaning and purpose. After supper, in the hour before full darkness, Thomas sits outside his cottage door on a bench worn smooth by years of use. The village settles into its evening quiet, that peaceful time when the work of the day is complete and rest beckons. Stars begin to appear in the deepening blue above, and somewhere in the distance, a nightingale begins its song. Tomorrow he will return to the workshop, will continue the work of building the chest, will lose himself again in the particular perfection of wood and tool and skill working in harmony. But for now, he simply sits, breathing the cool evening air, grateful for strong hands that can still hold tools with certainty, grateful for eyes that can still see the grain of wood clearly, grateful for a craft that feeds his family and feeds his soul, grateful for this ordinary, extraordinary life. Part 2. The Rhythm of Seasons. The chest for the wool merchant takes shape over the following days, each morning bringing new progress, new small victories of craft and patience. Thomas glues the joints with hide glue. He prepares himself, heating the dried granules in water over a small charcoal brazier until they dissolve into a thick, honey-colored liquid that smells faintly of old bones. The glue must be applied hot, worked quickly before it begins to set, and Thomas has learned over the years to move with efficient certainty during these critical moments. He brushes the glue into mortises and onto tenons, then assembles the joints and drives oak pegs through pre-drilled holes, locking everything together with a permanence that will outlast his lifetime. When the chest's main body is assembled and the glue has cured overnight, Thomas planes the surfaces smooth, working methodically from one end to the other. The plane, his favorite, a jack plane with a blade set to take a medium shaving, whispers across the oak with a sound like a long, satisfied sigh. Long curls of wood peel away from the blade's edge, translucent as paper, revealing the golden inner wood beneath. These shavings are too beautiful to discard immediately. Thomas's children love to play with them, fashioning them into little spiral toys, or simply enjoying their texture and the way they spring back when released. The lid proves to be the most complex part of the chest, requiring careful thought about how it will be hinged and how it will stay open when the merchant needs access to his documents. Thomas decides on a design where the lid will rest on a rabbet cut into the chest's rim, with iron hinges at the back and a hasp at the front for a lock. Inside the lid, he will fit a small till a removable tray with compartments for storing seals, small valuables, and writing implements. He spends an entire morning cutting the rabbet, using a combination of saw and chisel to create the L-shaped channel that runs around the chest's inner rim. The work requires absolute precision. If the rabbet is too deep, the lid will sit too low and bind, too shallow, and gaps will appear. Thomas measures constantly, checking his progress against the lid boards, adjusting by fractions of an inch until everything aligns perfectly. The till is a miniature masterpiece in itself, a small box divided into compartments with thin walls of oak barely thicker than a coin. Making these delicate pieces challenges Thomas's skill in new ways. The wood is thin enough that a careless chisel stroke could split it entirely, so he works with his smallest tools with extreme patience, making cuts so fine they're barely visible. When the till is complete, fitted with a sliding lid of its own, Thomas allows himself a moment of quiet pride. This is the kind of detail that separates adequate work from exceptional work, the kind of thing the wool merchant may never specifically notice, but will appreciate every time he opens his chest. As he works, the summer deepens around the village. The days grow longer and warmer, and Thomas often works with both workshop doors thrown wide, allowing whatever breeze exists to flow through. Swallows nest in the rafters above his workbench, their constant chittering a pleasant background to the sounds of his tools. He watches them feed their young, marveling at their tireless industry, the way they dart in and out of the workshop all day long, never seeming to rest, always finding one more insect to bring to the gaping mouths in the nest. The fields around the village turn golden as the wheat ripens, and there is a sense of anticipation in the air. Everyone watching the grain, waiting for that precise moment when it will be ready for harvest. Thomas knows his workshop will be busy after harvest. There are always tools that need handles replaced, always damaged equipment that requires repair before it can be stored away for another year. But for now, while the growing season lasts, he can focus on projects like the wool merchant's chest, work that requires extended concentration rather than quick repairs. On a morning when the heat has arrived early, making the workshop stuffy despite the open doors, Thomas decides to work outside on a project that has been waiting for attention. A set of roof shingles for his own cottage. The thatch is sound for now, but he likes to stay ahead of maintenance. And a small section over the children's loft would benefit from some oak shingles to provide extra protection against the winter rains that are still months away. He carries his shaving horse outside and sets it up in the shade of the ash tree that grows beside his workshop. The shaving horse is a simple but ingenious tool, a bench with a hinged clamp operated by foot pressure, allowing him to hold wood securely while he shapes it with a draw knife. Thomas has owned this particular shaving horse since his journeyman days. He built it himself under his master's supervision, and it has followed him through 2 decades and 3 different workshops. The oak he selected for shingles was split from a straight-grained log months ago, creating rough blanks that now need to be shaped into proper shingles thin, tapered pieces that will overlap like scales on a fish, shedding water away from the roof. Thomas sets the first blank in the shaving horse and secures it with foot pressure, then takes his draw knife in both hands. The draw knife is a blade with handles at both ends, designed to be pulled toward the user, slicing away wood in controlled passes. It's a tool that demands respect and concentration. A slip could result in serious injury, but in practiced hands, it's extraordinarily efficient. Thomas positions the blade at the thick end of the blank and pulls steadily, and a long, thick shaving peels away, revealing fresh wood beneath. Pull after pull, the rough blank transforms, growing thinner and more refined, its taper becoming pronounced, its surface smoothing. This work has its own particular pleasure, different from the precision of joinery or the satisfaction of planing. There's something almost sculptural about it, something that requires reading the wood's grain and following its natural inclinations. When Thomas works with the grain, the draw knife slices through oak like it's soft cheese. When he works against it, the blade catches and tears, and the wood resists. So he learns to pay attention, to let the wood guide him, to find that harmonious relationship between tool and material that produces the best results with the least effort. As he works, neighbors pass by and pause to chat. Old Benedict the baker stops on his way to check his beehives in the orchard beyond the village, and they talk about the weather, about whether the wheat will be ready by week's end, about Benedict's grandson who shows an interest in woodworking and might become an apprentice in a year or 2. Maria the dairymaid pauses with her yoke and buckets, resting for a moment, and shares news from the manor house. The lord and lady will be visiting next month, which means everyone will need to ensure their holdings are in good order, their cottages presentable, their rents current. These conversations are part of the fabric of village life, the way information spreads, the way community is maintained. Thomas knows everyone in the village, knows their trades and their families, knows who is skilled at what, and who can be called upon when help is needed. It's a small world, bounded by the fields that surround them and the forest beyond, but it's a complete world, largely self-sufficient, requiring little from the outside except salt and iron and the occasional exotic spice or tool. By midday, Thomas has shaped a dozen shingles, and the pile of long curling shavings around the shaving horse has grown impressively large. His children will gather these later for kindling. They burn hot and quick, perfect for starting fires. He carries the finished shingles into the workshop to dry further before installation, then takes a break for the midday meal. Margaret has prepared a simple but satisfying dinner, bread and cheese again, but also boiled eggs from their chickens, fresh lettuce from the garden dressed with vinegar and herbs, and small beer to drink. They eat in the cottage's main room, where the hearth fire has been allowed to die down to coals. It's too hot for a large fire, and Margaret has done her cooking in the early morning before the day's heat built up. After eating, Thomas allows himself a rare luxury, a brief rest in the heat of the day. He lies down on the bed he shares with Margaret, and through the small window, he can see white clouds drifting across the intense blue of the summer sky. The cottage is dim and cool, a welcome refuge from the sun, and he can hear the distant sounds of the village going about its afternoon, someone hammering at the smithy, children's voices from the common, the lowing of cattle in their pasture. His eyes grow heavy, and for perhaps half an hour he dozes, his body grateful for the rest after a morning of physical labor. When he returns to the workshop in the afternoon, refreshed, he turns his attention back to the wool merchant's chest. It is nearly complete now, needing only some final details, the fitting of the hinges and hasp, which he will leave for the blacksmith to provide and install, and the application of a finish to protect and beautify the wood. Thomas prepares a mixture of linseed oil and beeswax, warming them together until they combine into a golden paste that smells of summer fields and honeycomb. He applies this mixture with a cloth, rubbing it into the oak in long circular motions, working it into the grain, feeling the wood drink it in gratefully. The oil and wax combination will penetrate the wood's surface, filling the pores, providing protection against moisture and wear, while enhancing the natural beauty of the grain. As Thomas works the finish into the chest, the oak transforms before his eyes. The grain becomes more pronounced, darker lines standing out against lighter background, the ray fleck beginning to shimmer with that characteristic silky sheen that makes oak so prized for fine furniture. He works methodically, covering every surface, inside and out, taking special care with the joints and the delicate compartments of the till. The work is meditative, requiring attention, but not intense concentration, and his mind drifts pleasantly as his hands move. He thinks about his children and their futures, about young Thomas, who shows aptitude for building trades, and Anne, who has a gift for fine handwork. He thinks about his own apprenticeship, decades ago now, in a shop 3 villages away, learning this craft from a master who was strict but fair, who taught not just techniques, but the philosophy of craftsmanship, the belief that work is worthy of one's best effort. That shoddy work dishonors both the maker and the user. When the first coat of finish is applied, Thomas sets the chest aside to dry and turns to other work waiting for his attention. There are always small jobs, quick repairs that villagers bring to him, knowing he will handle them promptly and fairly. Today, it's a stool with a broken leg for the miller's wife, a door that has warped and needs planing for one of the shepherd's cottages, and a carved panel for the church that Father Edmund has commissioned, though this last is a longer-term project that Thomas works on in spare moments. The church panel is perhaps the most personally meaningful work Thomas does. It will be installed above the new side door that was cut through the church wall last year, and it depicts the village's patron Saint Nicholas, surrounded by symbolic elements. Thomas is not an artist in the sense of those men who travel from cathedral to cathedral, painting elaborate frescoes, but he has a craftsman's eye for proportion and a steady hand for carving, and Father Edmund trusts him to create something appropriate and dignified. He retrieves the partially completed panel from where it rests wrapped in cloth in a corner of the workshop. The basic design is established, the saint's figure outlined, the composition blocked in, but there is still considerable work to do in terms of detail and refinement. Thomas sets the panel on his bench and studies it for a long moment, planning his next moves, deciding which areas to work on today. Carving is different from other woodworking, requiring different tools and different mental approaches. Instead of removing wood to achieve a functional shape, carving is about creating depth and texture, about making flat surfaces appear to have dimension and life. Thomas selects his carving gouges, curved chisels that come in various sweeps and widths, and begins to work on the folds of St. Nicholas's robe, using the gouges to create shadows and highlights, to make the carved wood suggest the drape and weight of fabric. The work is slow and requires absolute focus. A single wrong cut cannot be undone. At best, the design must be adjusted to accommodate the error. Thomas works with small, controlled cuts, frequently stopping to brush away chips and examine his progress from different angles. The wood he is carving, a fine piece of lime wood, softer and more forgiving than oak, responds beautifully to his tools, allowing details that would be impossible in harder woods. Time dissolves as Thomas works on the carving. The afternoon light shifts across the workshop floor, dust motes dancing in the golden beams, and he is barely aware of it, lost in the intimate conversation between his tools and the wood. This is the deepest kind of focus, the state where self-consciousness vanishes and there is only the work, only the next cut, only the gradual revelation of the image that exists somewhere in the intersection of his mind and the wood's potential. When he finally sets down his tools and steps back, the light has changed to the warmer tones of late afternoon, and his back aches from bending over the work. But progress has been made. St. Nicholas's robe now has depth and character, the folds appearing to catch light and shadow in ways that suggest real fabric rather than carved wood. Thomas covers the panel again and stretches, feeling his spine pop, rolling his shoulders to release tension. The evening routine unfolds as it does every day. The workshop tidying, the tools cleaned and stored, the door latched securely. Thomas washes his face and hands in the bucket of water that stands by the workshop door. The water is warm from sitting in the sun all day, and it feels good to rinse away the sweat and sawdust of the day's labor. He can see Margaret through the cottage window, moving about in the preparation of supper, and the sight fills him with contentment. This is the life he has built, board by board, joint by joint, as carefully and skillfully as any piece of furniture. A good marriage, healthy children, work that challenges and satisfies him, a place in a community where he is respected and needed. It is not a grand life. There will be no songs written about Thomas the Carpenter, no chronicles recording his deeds, but it is a life of substance and meaning, built on the foundation of honest labor and careful attention to craft. Supper that evening is especially good. Margaret has made a pie with early apples from the tree in their garden, the fruit still tart but sweetened with honey, baked in a crust made tender with lard. They eat it while it's still warm, the sweet tart filling steaming as Thomas cuts through the crust, and it tastes like the promise of autumn, of harvest time ahead, of the turning year. After supper, young Thomas asks his father to teach him how to sharpen a chisel properly. The boy has his own small set of tools now, gifts from various birthdays and saints' days, and he is eager to learn their proper care. So father and son sit together on the bench outside the cottage, and Thomas demonstrates the proper angle, the correct motion, the way to test for sharpness. The boy's hands are still clumsy, not yet possessing the muscle memory that makes the motions automatic, but Thomas sees his own younger self in the boy's concentration, in the way his tongue sticks out slightly as he focuses on maintaining the correct angle. Patience, Thomas says, as his own master said to him so many years ago. The tool will become sharp if you give it time and attention. Rushing produces nothing but frustration and dull edges. Young Thomas nods seriously, taking the wisdom to heart, and continues his careful stroking of steel against stone. Anne sits nearby, working on her embroidery, creating tiny perfect stitches that will eventually form a scene of flowers and birds. Both children have inherited their parents' appreciation for work well done, for the satisfaction of creating something with their own hands. As twilight deepens into true darkness, the family remains outside, reluctant to retreat indoors while the evening is so pleasant. The sky fills with stars in their thousands, more stars than could ever be counted, and Thomas points out the constellations he knows: the plow, the herdsman, the great bear. These are the same stars that have looked down on carpenters and farmers and shepherds for time beyond memory. The same patterns that will continue long after Thomas and his children's children have returned to dust. There is something profoundly comforting in this continuity, in being part of a story that extends far beyond individual lives. The workshop that Thomas tends, the tools he maintains, the skills he practices, all of these are links in a chain that stretches back to the first humans who learned to shape wood for their purposes, and forward to craftsmen who will work centuries hence, using tools and techniques that would be recognizable to Thomas despite the years between them. When the family finally retires for the night, Thomas lies in bed, listening to the sounds of his sleeping household, Margaret's soft breathing beside him, the occasional creak from the loft above where the children sleep, the settling sounds of the cottage itself. Outside, an owl calls from the nearby woods, and somewhere in the distance a dog barks once, then falls silent. Tomorrow, he will deliver the completed chest to the wool merchant, will collect his payment, and will begin work on the next project, a dining table for a family in the neighboring village, requested through a message from the priest there. But tomorrow can take care of itself. For now, Thomas drifts toward sleep, his body tired in the good way that comes from honest labor, his mind at peace, wrapped in the comfortable darkness of his home, secure in the knowledge that he has lived this day well, that his work will endure, that his children will carry forward what he has taught them. The village sleeps around him, every cottage dark, every hearth banked for the night, and the summer stars wheel slowly overhead, marking time in their ancient, patient way, watching over this small community of souls doing their best to live well and work honestly in the medieval world they inhabit. And in his workshop, the wool merchant's chest waits for morning, its joints tight, its finish glowing even in darkness, a testament to care and skill and the quiet dignity of the craftsman's life. Part 3. The Gift of Craft. Autumn arrives gradually, announcing itself first in the quality of light softer, more golden, slanting through the workshop windows at different angles than it did in summer. The swallows that nested in Thomas's rafters gather in chattering flocks on the ridge of the church roof, preparing for their mysterious journey to warmer lands. The mornings carry a coolness that requires Thomas to wear his heavier tunic, though by midday the sun still has enough strength to make the workshop comfortable without a fire. The harvest comes and goes in a flurry of communal activity, every able-bodied person in the village working together to bring in the wheat and barley before the weather can turn. Thomas sets aside his woodworking for those crucial days and works in the fields alongside his neighbors, wielding a sickle, gathering grain into sheaves, helping to load the harvest carts. His hands, so accustomed to the smooth handles of planes and chisels, acquire new blisters from the rougher work, but there is no question of not participating. The harvest belongs to everyone, and everyone contributes what they can. When the last of the grain is safely stored in the manor's barns and in individual family larders, the village celebrates with a harvest feast. Tables are set up in the churchyard, and every household contributes what they can: roasted geese and chickens, fresh bread made with the new wheat, vegetable stews rich with onions and turnips, cheese and butter, and ale that has been saved for this occasion. Thomas's contribution is his labor in constructing additional trestle tables for the feast, quickly made but sturdy, designed to be disassembled and stored until needed again next year. The feast stretches from afternoon into evening, filled with eating and drinking and the kind of easy conversation that comes when people who work hard together allow themselves a moment of rest. Musicians appear: old Gregory with his fiddle, young Peter with his pipe, and the blacksmith's son with a drum made from a barrel. And there is dancing in the fading light, awkward and enthusiastic, everyone laughing at their own clumsiness and not caring in the slightest. Thomas dances with Margaret, holding her close, feeling her warmth against him as they turn and step to the music's rhythm. They have been married for 20 years, and in that time her face has acquired lines and her hair some threads of gray. But to Thomas, she is as beautiful as the day he first saw her at a similar feast in her home village. He thinks, not for the first time, how fortunate he has been, how easily life could have turned out differently, how grateful he is for what he has. As the feast winds down and people begin to drift toward their homes, Tired and full and content, Father Edmund approaches Thomas with a request. The church's processional cross has developed a crack in its wooden base, and the priest wonders if Thomas might be able to repair it. The cross is an important object, used in ceremonies throughout the year, carried at the head of the congregation during festivals and holy days, and it would be a significant thing if it could not be used. Thomas agrees to look at it, and the following morning he visits the church, that ancient stone building that has stood at the heart of the village for longer than anyone can remember. Inside, the air is cool and smells of incense and stone and age. His footsteps echo on the worn flagstones as he walks down the nave to where Father Edmund waits with the cross. The damage is significant, but not irreparable. The wooden base is cracked along the grain, likely from being dropped or knocked against something hard. The crack extends nearly the full length of the base, and when Thomas carefully tests it, he can feel the two halves wanting to separate. But the wood is good oak, well-aged, and with proper attention, it can be saved. "I can repair it," Thomas tells the priest. "It will require careful work, but it can be made whole again. Perhaps stronger than before." Father Edmund's relief is visible. "How long will you need?" Thomas considers. "A few days. I'll need to make a jig to hold the pieces precisely as they should be. Clean out the crack thoroughly. Prepare fresh glue. And it must dry completely before the cross can be used again. Take whatever time is needed," Father Edmund says. "Better to do it properly than to rush and have it fail again." Thomas carries the cross back to his workshop wrapped in cloth, treating it with the reverence it deserves. This is not merely a piece of wood to him. It is an object that has blessed marriages and baptisms, that has led funeral processions and marked holy days, that has been touched by every priest who has served this church for generations. Repairing it is both an honor and a responsibility. He spends the rest of that day and part of the next creating a cradle that will hold the base in perfect alignment while glue dries. The cradle is a temporary construction, wedges and blocks arranged to grip the cracked base without applying so much pressure that the wood might damage further. When he is satisfied with the cradle's design, he carefully opens the crack wider, cleaning out all the old dirt and debris that has worked its way into the split over time. The glue he prepares for this repair is the finest he can make, using only the best hide glue heated to just the right consistency. He works it into the crack with a thin blade, ensuring it penetrates fully, then carefully brings the two halves back together. They align perfectly, the wood remembers its original form, and he positions the assembly in his cradle, checking and rechecking that everything is exactly as it should be before the glue begins to set. While the glue cures over the next 2 days, Thomas turns his attention to other work. The carpenter's trade is never without tasks, especially as autumn progresses toward winter. People are thinking ahead now, preparing for the cold months, and there are many small jobs that need doing. Shutters that need tightening before winter winds arrive. Doors that have swollen in summer humidity and now need planing to close properly. Stools and benches that have developed wobbles that will become more annoying when everyone is confined indoors by winter weather. Thomas also receives a commission that makes him smile a cradle for the blacksmith's wife, who is expecting their first child as winter approaches. This is the kind of work that Thomas particularly enjoys, making something that will hold precious cargo, that will be the site of so many quiet moments between parent and child. He selects his wood carefully for this project, choosing birch for its smooth, pale beauty and its lack of splinters, choosing boards with the straightest, tightest grain he can find. The design he settles on is traditional, but refined. A hood at one end to protect the baby's head from drafts, gently curved rockers to allow soothing motion, and carefully smoothed interior surfaces without any joints or gaps where tiny fingers might catch. He works on the cradle in the afternoons, when natural light is best, using his finest planes to achieve surfaces so smooth they seem to glow, checking constantly with his hands as well as his eyes, knowing that touch will reveal imperfections that sight might miss. As he shapes the rockers, those graceful curves that will allow the cradle to move in gentle arcs. Thomas thinks about his own children's infancy, about the cradle that held them both, that now sits in the cottage loft, waiting for potential grandchildren years hence. He remembers Margaret rocking young Thomas in that cradle, singing softly in the deep of night, and later doing the same with Anne. The memory is sweet and slightly melancholy, that particular ache that comes from realizing how quickly time passes, how children who were once small enough to sleep in cradles grow into young people preparing to make their own ways in the world. The weather turns cooler as October progresses, and Thomas begins to work with a small fire in the workshop's brazier, appreciating its warmth in the mornings before the day has fully awakened. The fire serves a practical purpose beyond warmth. It keeps his glue pot hot and ready, ensures that finishes dry properly, even when humidity is high, and provides a pleasant focal point during breaks when he can warm his hands and rest his eyes. One morning, as frost decorates every surface and his breath mists in the cold air, Thomas discovers that his supply of good oak is running lower than he'd like. This means a journey to the forest, to the section where the Lord's forester oversees the careful harvest of timber. Thomas has a long-standing arrangement with the forester, built on years of mutual respect and fair dealing, and he knows he will be able to select good trees that can be felled and delivered to his workshop. He sets out after breakfast, taking the forest path that winds between fields, and then enters the ancient woodland that covers the hills beyond the village. The forest in autumn is a place of particular beauty. The oak and ash retain some of their leaves, now turned to bronze and gold, while beech trees glow copper in the slanting morning light. The forest floor is carpeted with fallen leaves that rustle underfoot, and mushrooms of various types push up through the rich leaf mold, their caps gleaming with moisture. Thomas walks slowly, appreciating the peace of the forest, the way light filters through the canopy, the occasional sounds of birds moving through the undergrowth. This is where all his work begins, in these living trees, these patient organisms that spend decades or centuries growing, adding ring after ring, before being transformed into the furniture and buildings that make human life possible. He feels a deep respect for trees, a sense that they are partners in his craft, rather than merely raw materials. The forester's cottage appears ahead, smoke rising from its chimney, and Thomas finds the man outside, splitting firewood for his own winter supply. They greet each other warmly, and Thomas explains his needs. Together they walk deeper into the forest, discussing various trees, considering which ones are ready for harvest, which ones should be left to grow longer, which ones might be starting to decline and would benefit from being taken before they deteriorate. They settle on 2 oaks, neither enormous, but both of good size, with straight trunks and healthy crowns. The forester marks them for felling, and they agree on a price that is fair to both parties. The actual felling will happen later, when the forester's sons and helpers are available, and the logs will be delivered to Thomas's workshop on a cart drawn by the manor's oxen. But for now, the selection is made, and Thomas feels satisfied knowing that his timber supply will be replenished. On his walk back to the village, Thomas gathers fallen branches that catch his eye, smaller pieces that might be useful for tool handles, for small projects, for the kind of decorative work that requires interesting grain patterns. He also collects acorns from beneath a particularly magnificent oak, thinking that young Thomas might enjoy trying to grow them in pots, learning about how great trees begin from such small seeds. When he returns to the workshop, he finds a visitor waiting, a stranger to the village, a journeyman carpenter traveling in search of work and experience. The young man is perhaps 20 years old, thin and travel-worn, but with good tools in the pack on his back and an earnest expression on his face. He introduces himself as William, trained in a city workshop 2 days' journey distant, hoping to find a position where he can learn new techniques and earn enough to eventually establish himself as a master. Thomas listens to the young man's story, seeing himself decades ago in the same position, remembering the nervousness and hope of those journeyman years. He doesn't need another worker. His workshop is modest, designed for one man's labor, but he knows the importance of helping those who are learning the trade, of passing on knowledge as it was passed to him. "I cannot offer you permanent employment," Thomas says honestly, "but you are welcome to stay for a few weeks. You can assist me with some projects, and in return, I'll provide meals and a place to sleep in the workshop loft and teach you what I can about my methods." William's face lights with gratitude, and so Thomas gains a temporary apprentice. The young man proves to be skilled in the basics, but hungry to learn more refined techniques. Thomas sets him to work on the less critical parts of projects, watching carefully to assess his abilities, offering guidance and correction where needed. Having William in the workshop changes the rhythm of work. Thomas finds himself articulating knowledge that he normally applies without conscious thought, explaining the why as well as the how. Why this joint is better than that joint for a particular application. Why wood from different parts of a tree behaves differently. Why certain tools are maintained in specific ways. The act of teaching forces Thomas to think more deeply about his own practice, and he discovers that he learns things about his craft even as he teaches them. In the evenings, William joins the family for supper, and afterward Thomas and the young journeyman sit by the workshop fire, talking about carpentry, about different regions' traditions, about the variations in tools and techniques that William has encountered in his travels. These conversations are enriching for Thomas, reminding him that his way of working, while excellent, is not the only way, that there is always more to learn, always different perspectives to consider. The blacksmith's cradle nears completion under Thomas's careful attention. He has carved a simple but beautiful design into the hood, a pattern of oak leaves and acorns, symbol of strength and potential, and the whole piece has been sanded to an impossible smoothness and finished with multiple coats of oil that bring out the birch's subtle grain. When Thomas rocks the empty cradle gently, testing its motion, it moves with perfect balance, no catching or hesitation, just a smooth back and forth that will soothe countless fussy nights. He delivers the cradle to the blacksmith's cottage on a gray November afternoon, when the first snow of winter is beginning to fall in lazy, fat flakes. The blacksmith's wife is visibly pregnant now, moving with the particular care of someone carrying precious cargo, and when she sees the cradle, her eyes fill with tears of joy. "It's beautiful," she whispers, running her hand over the smooth wood, tracing the carved leaves with her fingertips. "Our baby will sleep so safe here." The blacksmith, a large man with hands scarred from years of working with fire and metal, handles the cradle with surprising gentleness, testing the rockers, examining the joints with an expert eye. He nods with satisfaction, recognizing quality work when he sees it, and thanks Thomas with genuine warmth. "What do I owe you?" he asks, reaching for his purse. Thomas names a price that is fair, but not high. He knows the blacksmith's situation, knows that a first child brings many expenses, knows that the blacksmith has often provided metalwork for Thomas at generous rates. This is how community works in the village, everyone helping everyone else, relationships built on years of reciprocal assistance and mutual respect. As Thomas walks back to his workshop through the falling snow, he feels the particular satisfaction that comes from work that serves human happiness. The cradle will hold a new life, will be the site of parents' love expressed in countless small acts of care. This is the deeper purpose of his craft, not merely making objects, but creating the physical framework within which life happens, within which families gather, within which comfort and security can flourish. The church cross, fully repaired now, sits on his workbench waiting to be returned. Thomas has done more than simply glue the crack. He has reinforced the repair with two carefully fitted oak splines, invisible from the front, but adding strength that will prevent future splitting. He has also refinished the entire base, stripping away decades of accumulated grime and wear, revealing the oak's original beauty, then applying fresh oil that brings the grain to life. When he returns the cross to Father Edmund, the priest examines it carefully, turning it in his hands, testing the once broken area that now shows no sign of damage. "This is masterwork, Thomas," The priest says quietly. "You have done more than repair, you have renewed. The cross is more beautiful now than I have ever seen it." Thomas shrugs, uncomfortable with direct praise, but pleased nonetheless. "It is an important object, Father. It deserved my best effort. And that," Father Edmund says, "is why you are respected in this village. Not merely because you have skill, though you do, but because you approach every task, great or small, with the same commitment to excellence. That is a form of prayer, Thomas, even if you do not think of it in those terms." The conversation stays with Thomas as he returns to his workshop. He has never thought of himself as particularly religious. He attends Mass on Sundays, as everyone does, observes the holy days, says his prayers, but he has never considered his work itself as a form of devotion. Yet perhaps the priest is right. Perhaps the attention he brings to each joint, each surface, each detail is indeed a kind of prayer, a way of honoring creation by creating well, a way of serving others by giving them objects that will enhance their lives. William the journeyman stays for 3 weeks in total, and by the time he prepares to continue his travels, he has learned much and contributed meaningfully to several projects. On his last evening, Thomas gives him a small plane he has made himself. A smoothing plane perfectly sized for William's hands, the blade sharpened to keenness, the whole tool representing hours of careful work. "A journeyman should have good tools," Thomas says. "This will serve you well if you maintain it properly." William is speechless for a moment, understanding the value of the gift, both in terms of the tool itself and what it represents, one craftsman acknowledging another. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next, the continuity of the craft maintained. He stammers his thanks, promising to use the tool well, to remember what Thomas has taught him, to perhaps someday pass similar knowledge to his own students. After William departs, the workshop seems quiet, and Thomas realizes he has enjoyed having someone to teach, has enjoyed the conversation and the different perspective the young man brought. It makes him think about his own son, about young Thomas, who is now apprenticed to the thatcher, but who might still benefit from learning more carpentry, from having skills in multiple trades that will serve him throughout his life. Winter settles in fully now, and the workshop becomes a place of warmth and refuge from the cold world outside. Thomas rises earlier each morning to light the brazier before beginning work, and he often works by candlelight in the afternoons when daylight fails early. The work continues furniture repairs, tool handle replacements, planning for larger projects that will begin when spring returns. On the longest night of the year, the winter solstice, Thomas finishes a small project that has been occupying his spare moments, a set of wooden toys for his children, even though they are perhaps getting too old for such things. For young Thomas, a carefully jointed wooden sword that is light and safe, but realistic enough to satisfy a boy's imagination. For Anne, a carved bird that sits on a small perch, its wings spread as if about to take flight, detailed enough that individual feathers are visible. He gives these gifts on Christmas morning, and the joy on his children's faces tells him that they are not too old after all, that some part of them still cherishes the simple magic of a toy made by loving hands. Young Thomas immediately wants to know how the sword's joints work, how his father achieved such smooth curves, and Thomas promises to teach him, to pass on these skills just as he passed on knowledge to William the journeyman. The day after Christmas, Thomas stands in his workshop doorway, looking out at the snow-covered village, at the smoke rising from every chimney, at the world made clean and simple by winter's blanket. His breath mists in the cold air, and his hands, those skilled hands that have shaped so much wood, created so many objects, are wrapped around a cup of hot cider, grateful for the warmth. He thinks about the year behind him, about the projects completed, about the people served, about the moments of perfect focus when tool and wood and intention aligned in creating something good. He thinks about the year ahead, about new projects waiting to begin, about timber that will arrive from the forest, about skills that will continue to deepen with practice and attention. This is life, lived one day at a time, one cut at a time, one carefully fitted joint at a time. It is a life of substance built from attention to detail, of meaning created through service to others, of satisfaction derived from work done as well as it can be done. The workshop behind him holds the tools of his trade, the materials of his craft, the accumulated wisdom of decades spent learning how wood and maker can work together to create beauty and utility. As evening approaches and Margaret calls him to supper, Thomas closes the workshop door and latches it securely, leaving his work to wait for tomorrow, ready to begin again the eternal cycle of creation that is the carpenter's gift and calling. Inside the cottage, lamplight glows golden, and the smell of cooking fills the air with warmth and welcome. This too is what he has built, not with tools and wood, but with love and commitment and daily choice a home, a family, a life of meaning in the heart of a medieval village where time moves slowly and work is honored, and every day brings the opportunity to create something lasting and good. And so our peaceful journey through the medieval workshop comes to a gentle close. We have walked alongside Thomas the carpenter through seasons of creation, watched as raw timber became treasures under patient hands, felt the warmth of wood shavings and the satisfaction of joints fitted true. We have witnessed not merely the making of objects, but the building of a life measured in careful cuts and smooth surfaces, in community served and skills passed forward, in the quiet dignity of work done with love. Thank you for spending this time with Medieval Sleep Tales, for allowing us to carry you away from the rush of the modern world into the slower, gentler rhythms of medieval life. If this story has brought you peace, comfort, or restful sleep, please consider leaving a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to journey with us through more cozy medieval tales, where every story is a warm hearth waiting to welcome you home. May your own work bring you satisfaction. May your rest be deep and restorative, and may you find beauty in the simple, honest moments of daily life. Until next time, from Medieval Sleep Tales, sweet medieval dreams.